I'm making another album. And I got a text yesterday from one of my top clients letting me know that he'd listened to my last album, Reach, on the podcast. And it was quite funny. He was like, you need to release this properly on Spotify. I'm just coaching you. I'm just using your coaching on you. I like it. You've got to release this immediately. And so I listened to it again. And what I was extremely surprised to realize was, I don't know why I was surprised, because I kind of expected it, but I didn't think it would be as clear. What I realized was how much better my singing and songwriting is now than just, how long ago was it? It was like November, December, something like that, just 3 or 4 months ago. I don't know why I was surprised, because obviously one of the reasons, in fact, probably the main reason, apart from the fact that I love it, but apart from that, the main reason that I'm making albums is to improve as a singer and songwriter. I have not found another way to make any significant progress on my music in the context of a very hectic life. I've found no other way to make significant progress on my music other than making albums. But what's interesting is you would have thought that given the way that music is taught and learned, that making albums wouldn't be, something like making an album wouldn't be the best way to improve as a singer and songwriter. Isn't practice how you do it? Not when you think of making albums as practice. And this is one of the reasons I haven't so far released the last 2 albums that I've made properly. They're on podcasts, but not in terms of, actual streaming platforms like Apple Music and Spotify Music. Although, confusingly, they are on Spotify, but in a podcast. Because for me, albums are about progress. Albums are about growth. They are a vehicle for me to improve. And I'm extremely excited to go into the final 2 weeks of making this album and for you to hear it, because I think you'll notice as well how much better the singing and songwriting is. Now, I do have a question about whether to release the previous 2 albums properly on Spotify, because arguably it would be pretty cool to have the journey there from the beginning all the way through to wherever I get to. But I'll leave that for another podcast, because today I just want to have a think through how I'm going to approach the finishing of this album, because it's going to be a somewhat different situation from the last 2. This time, because I had to put the deadline back just due to various family commitments that were going on, because I had to put the deadline back for 2 weeks, the Make an Album with Mike 5 program is starting this week, and then I have another week of finishing my album. And then after that, I'm having a week off, because after I finish an album, I always have a week off. I don't have the week off in terms of workshops and things like that, but certainly in terms of making music. So for the next album, I'm actually going to be 2 weeks behind from the get-go. Having said that, though, because I've got my 1,000 songs in 1,000 days splurges going, I have been splurging the whole time. In fact, I'm a little bit ahead of 1,000 songs in 1,000 days. I've got a countdown on my phone down to the 1,000 days time, and I think I'm on something like 930. And today I just splurged song 922 because I'm counting down. So I am a few days ahead. All of that to say is that I do have plenty of splurges to start my next album with. So I'm not too concerned about that. So that's the first thing. Instead of stressing out about the next step after I complete this album, what I'm going to do is just turn my focus to how to make this album, the one I'm finishing now, as good as it could possibly be. And in listening to the previous album, the Reach mixtape that I finished, the one that my A-list client texted me about, one of the pitfalls that I fear is that I'm going to fall into overcomplicating the production. I mean, I don't think the production on the Rich mixtape is that overcomplicated, but there are certainly some areas where I might have done something different if I had my time again. The problem that I'm trying to solve with this album is that it's actually telling quite a fantastical story. So I fall to sleep and I enter this dream world, and I'm guided by my shadow self, the dark side of me. And my shadow shows me various different memories and dreams for me to understand why I have various different sort of character traits which I don't like very much, why my shadow is there. And essentially it's a story of acceptance and understanding and eventually triumph. It's a hero's journey. And in a story like that, the temptation is to have a lot of crazy production going on. But I don't want it to be like that. Like, what I want the vocal and the song to be its simplest form. And I don't think it necessarily has to be all of that complicated to get there. And the reason for that is, again, because what I am making albums for, the number one purpose of my albums is for me to improve. And if I spend the next 2 weeks simply focusing on fancy production tricks, that means I'm not investing that time in my vocal performance and in my playing. Because really, finishing an album, as I said, is a golden opportunity to make an enormous amount of progress, particularly in the final stages. When you're recording the final versions of whatever it is you're making, let's say you're recording vocals, you have to do a number of different vocal takes. Essentially what you're doing there is you're practicing for a performance. In fact, you're doing the performance over and over again. This is a huge opportunity to do the very best kind of practice, the most deliberate practice it's possible to have, because you're actually doing the thing. You're attempting to put that emotion across. The more time I spend recording myself playing and singing, the more my singing is going to improve, the more my performance is going to improve, even beyond the surprising result that I noticed in listening back to my past album. So when I have a problem like this, when I know that there is a pitfall that I could fall into and I want to avoid those pitfalls, what I usually do is I come up with some kind of a game, or in other words, a set of rules and limitations. It's almost like guiding principles. So I am going to do this and I am not going to do that. So for example, I am only going to use 5 instruments and my voice. So that kind of a limitation that I'm putting on myself stops me from overcomplicating the production. Another thing that I can do is set myself rules as to how I actually run the session. So at the start of every session, until the vocal is recorded, or the keyboard parts, because I'm trying to do as many live keyboard parts as possible. So until the performance parts are recorded, that is what I'm going to do. I'm going to record the parts that I'm performing first and get the best takes of them. And once I have those final takes, that is the moment that I start adding extra stuff, so that I'm adding the stuff to support the performance rather than eclipsing the performance with the extra stuff. Something else I could do, and I'm not saying I'm going to do this because I'm not sure, but I could say every song that I record is going to be one take. I think that might be a bit extreme for me right now. But I mean, what I could say is I'm not going to do any comping within verses. So I'm allowed to say record a verse and then choose a different chorus, but within a musical section, I'm not allowed to drop in other lines to optimize for my growth. Because obviously, if I'm having to record an entire verse from beginning to end, there's just a different vibe to it. If I'm able to edit words in, that's not optimizing for my performance. That's optimizing for editing. I'm going to get better at editing rather than performing. And that doesn't work for me. So that's another rule that I could set for myself. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to have a think about this over the next few days, because I've got a few days off for Easter right now. And I'm going to set up for myself some rules. I mean, if you've done splurging with me, or in fact, if you've done any of the activations in the Magic Music Machine, you'll know the kind of game I'm talking about, where I create specific rules and limitations, which then you work within, and that helps you get different results, different insights, different types of music. Depending on where you are at in the machine and what your goals are, you can create these games for yourself to get a certain result. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to think about what my goals are for this album in terms of what I want it to be, more crucially, really, what I want it to do for me in terms of my growth as a musician, singer, songwriter, and producer. And don't forget, if you're interested in making an album with me, at the time of recording this, it's starting on Thursday. Making an Album with Mike 5 is starting on Thursday, the 4th of April, 2024. And if you'd like to make an album with me, if you'd like to experience the kind of growth that I'm talking about here for yourself, if you'd like to ensure that music remains a priority, even in a life which isn't set up for music being the priority, because that's what albums do, it keeps music front and center, then click the link in the show notes where you can find out all the details. And with all that said, I'm going to stop talking about making an album and start making one.